This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Today I am joined by two brothers, Aaron Halbert and Andrew Halbert. Welcome, brothers.
Good to be here.
Good to be here, yeah.
Both of you, this is your first time on the podcast, so why don't you introduce yourselves? We'll start with Andrew.
Yeah, so I am at Christ Covenant in Knoxville. I'm the missions pastor. Been here for about a year and a half. And prior to that, my family was 10 years in San Jose, Costa Rica. I was working with a mission agency called United World Mission. It's now called Mesa Global, as a professor at a non-denominational or an interdenominational seminary there. And then prior to that was in seminary, and prior to that was actually in Peru for a couple of years as a missionary with Mission to the World as a single guy on a church planting team. So that's kind of my background and where I am now.
And Aaron, you are in Honduras, the one in Latin America. Is that correct?
It is. It is. We are in the belly button of Central America, right in the heart. Well, if you want to say of the Americas, which from Canada all the way to the bottom, Honduras is right in the dead center. Been here now for 10 years. I'm the church planting pastor of Iglesia Presbiteriana Gracia Soberana, so Sovereign Grace Presbyterian Church. Moved here with my bride 10 years ago, this last March, and just kind of been plugging away. I'm with MTW here, focusing on church planting, looking to start not just one church, but an entire denomination if the Lord sees fit, but doing that one church at a time, slowly.
Yeah. Well, that is wonderful to hear. I remember our days in seminary, Aaron, and you talked about how you had a vision to start a Presbyterian denomination in Honduras and what that Book of Church Order might look like, and maybe some of the differences between the PCA Book of Church Order with what might be formed in Honduras. And we are just so amazed to see how God has worked through you and is bringing that vision to pass. Well, I want to talk with you about the ordinary means of grace. What are the ordinary means of grace? Is it good to be ordinary? What does it mean, the ordinary means of grace, and how does that relate to your ministries in Latin America?
Yeah, I definitely think we should be. I mean, the goal is that simplistic. It actually, I was just talking with, we have an intern down here. He's dating Cliff Daniel's daughter, if you know Cliff Daniel, and he's our intern. And we just worked through Kevin DeYoung's What is the Mission of the Church for part of his internship. And it's just always good to come back to just the simplicity of kind of the normalcy of what we're doing, right? We do it in Spanish, but it looks a whole lot like what happens in Knoxville and happens in Fort Oglethorpe and happens in Birmingham and happens in Nashville week by week as we just preach, pray, sing, read, see the word in sacraments. And it frees you as a missionary because, in essence, the Lord tells you He'll be with you, right? And I'm preaching through Exodus right now, and the response to Moses is, "I'll be with you. You're not enough, but I'll be with you." And so it actually takes all the shackles off, right? Because all of a sudden you can kind of say, set the word loose, and trust what the Lord will do with it. So I think when I think about ordinary means of grace, that's kind of what I think about is as we let the word do the work. The Lord is the one who causes the return on it, right?
Well, Andrew, as we think about the word and ordinary means of grace, what did that look like for you in Costa Rica?
Right. Obviously, preaching and reading the word, sacraments, prayer were things that we focused on. I kind of define those as I think about that as the God-ordained ways through which people hear, respond, and grow in the gospel. That's what God has given us. Ordinary because that's what they are. They're just supposed to be things we do regularly and frequently. And so one of the ways that I actually saw that kind of flesh out in our church, so we were not always in a Reformed church in Costa Rica. We spent half of our time in sort of non-denominational churches before we found this life-giving church that had found the Reformed faith prior to our getting there, and it actually connected with Mission to the World. But one of the things that we began to focus on was just how does the liturgy of church change on the Lord's Day when these are the things that are that are driving it, right? It's not what do we do to draw people in from a show standpoint, what attracts people. This is how God works, and so these are the things that are going to define our service from beginning to end, because these are the things that God has ordained for this purpose.
And you speak of the ordinary means of grace, which I think there's some double entendre there, in that these are ordinary things, but also these are the means that God has ordained for the gathering and perfecting of his saints. Obviously, he's free to use extraordinary means or use work without means. So what are some of the other philosophies on the mission field, competing philosophies of ministry? You said that church was life-giving because it was a Reformed church. So what are the alternatives that you're seeing where you are, or that are prevalent among evangelical and Protestant ministries in Latin America when you were serving down there?
Some of the ones that we saw in our experience with non-denominational churches were just much more showy. They're either program driven, in other words, what are all the things that we can do to draw people in, or they're very, very, they tended to be very emotion. So, trying to get a response from people out of worship, whether it's turning the lights down low or singing the same repetitive verse of a song until somebody finally gives up and raises their hand and comes forward. Those were some competing philosophies, and one of the things I actually noticed and appreciated about our church was that there were windows to the outside. We couldn't control the lights. We had whatever the weather outside was as our and to me that that's actually one of the things I appreciate about the Sovereign Grace over in Charlotte is about their sanctuary, is the beautiful windows that just open to the outside and let the natural light in, that don't allow you to control some of that environment. But I think that's one of the big competing philosophies of ministry in at least it was in Costa Rica. I don't know if Aaron has seen something similar or different in Honduras.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. Like, if you're talking about different philosophies in church planting, I mean, we're surrounded by prosperity gospel and all kinds of stuff that's pushing a different form of worship, a different gospel, a different approach to how we do church in general, right? And so that's one competing philosophy that would just be locally based. But if you're talking about mission philosophy, as far as Americans who are living in Honduras doing ministry, what we have mainly is kind of mercy ministry. Lots of people are here doing just, the idea is be the hands and feet of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it takes you back to Derek Thomas class, and just him saying, Christ, if you had a cell phone, you could call him, right? He's physically present in the created world. So how then can you be his hands and his feet? He has hands and feet, right? So at some level, there's this idea of go. I understand the sentiment with that, but the idea then is driven by what I'm doing in mercy ministry. And then oftentimes we've had people ask us, I had a lady asked my wife, so your husband does what? And she's like, he's a church planter. And she's like, what is that? And so for there to not be an understanding, they're doing mercy-based ministry, but not an understanding of church. And I was just listening to a podcast the other day.
Oh, podcasts are the worst.
They're the worst. And I'm going to quote. I'm going to reference a Baptist one. So 9 Marks talking about how our ecclesiology influences our missiology, and it has to. And I think the competing idea is that here is that missiology is forming how we view the church, and so missiology is kind of like, hey, we're going to go do these things, and this is what we're after, and then it influences how people view the church. So I would say competing. There's not a lot of desire for the local church, which is what we see in Acts, right? The idea is the church is the center of what we're doing. So I would say that's the competing philosophy.
And with those competing philosophies, I wonder, to what are they saved? Are they saved to the body of Christ? Is it possible that people can be saved, but not saved to the body of Christ? Which is, of course, an ancient question then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Aaron as far as this push towards mercy ministry is the focus. It's sort of I'm not going to quote a seminary professor, but sort of a field of dreams philosophy, if you will. If you build it, they will come. interestingly enough as well, so oh, let's do this outreach. People will come to Christ, and then we'll build a church. No, they won't. There's if there's no gospel proclamation, nobody's coming to Christ. And so mercy ministry, divorced from the local church, is just philanthropy. In fact, it's not ministry at all. It's just doing nice things for people to help them better their life situation. But without gospel proclamation behind that and driving that, you really get the tail wagging the dog in a lot of ways. To quote another Baptist, John Piper's famous book on missions opens with the words, "Missions exists because worship doesn't." And when worship exists as it should in glory, there won't be a need for missions anymore. And so the idea, even in his statement, there is the fact that missions, the whole goal of missions, is not to alleviate poverty or to change people's life situations as a primary factor. It's to bring people into a right relationship with God for His glory and to worship Him. You can't do that without the local church. Mercy ministry by itself just isn't going to do that.
Well, how have you seen the effectiveness of this ordinary means of grace, this word-based, church-centered ministry in Latin America, which sounds like is unique among Reformed Protestants? And of course, these debates and discussions are not about contemporary versus historic worship, but entertainment-driven worship and ministry versus word-driven worship and ministry. You can go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, and a lot of what was going on there is entertainment-driven. The Fanny Crosby hymns, very emotional, very repetitive, rather than imparting and confessing and singing the word of Christ and allowing the word of Christ to dwell richly in the people of God as they worship and admonish and encourage one another. So how do you see the word-based ministry, word-based worship as effective? How have you seen that in Latin America?
You want to go first, Aaron?
No, dale.
Well, I think maybe anecdotal. The way we saw it in our church in Costa Rica, when we got into that Reformed church, there was a change to our liturgy. So I had the opportunity to serve in sort of an assistant pastor role for several years with that church. I was invited to be sort of a member of the session, which was very very kind offer by them. But we watched as the even though it was already a Reformed church, we did make changes and improvements. And so we watched kind of the liturgy be more saturated with aspects of the word. We worked in an evening gathering that they weren't having before. Now, that was not my intention behind that, was for it to turn into an evening worship service. It did not. It was more of a Sunday school hour, which we didn't have in the mornings anyway. But we had half the church coming back, and that was 25 people, right? So half the church coming back on Sunday evenings to go through, scripture and studies of, to help them in their Christian walk. And then we actually implemented, this is one of the interesting things, we implemented the shorter catechism into worship. And so we would have a period in the worship where I would get up typically and I would read a question from the shorter catechism. They would respond with the answer. And then I would give sort of an exposition of what that question was getting at and dealing with. And by and large, the response to that from people was very positive. They enjoyed having that in worship. They enjoyed the instruction that it brought. They enjoyed the way it often, by God's Spirit, often tied into the larger worship service from the standpoint of content. It would link to the sermon in some ways. It linked to the music, even though we hadn't necessarily intentionally planned that. And people were very, very welcoming of that and encouraging for that to continue. They loved it, which I found fascinating.
And the conventional wisdom is it takes a long time to plant a Presbyterian church in Central America, Latin America. Aaron, you've found that is not quite accurate. I mean, you've had a Presbyterian church there for 10 years, and you started about 10 years ago. So how do you plant and organize so quickly?
The Lord's kindness, a lot of prayers before I look back on it and say the Lord was prepping things well before I got here, so that I could meet other men who had Reformed convictions and that kind of stuff. And I think in the wave of what has happened with a kind of the rise of some conservative reformed understanding of the scriptures from our confessional Baptist brothers and others. There's been a wave towards this, and so I think some people are looking for it. So one of the guys who's an elder candidate, he was checking the Gospel Coalition website in Spanish, hoping that a Presbyterian church would show up in Honduras. And then we posted it, and like the next week he was here, and he was like, I was Presbyterian before I even found y'all. And so like there are people that are reading and growing and getting access to more materials, and they're listening and looking to do that. And so when we kind of came and planted the church or began the Bible studies for the church, there were just people coming in and wanting to be a part of that. And so I don't look back and say there's some method to how do you do it quickly. I more say, in my charge, Ryan, to come to Honduras, I still remember Rob Hill saying, Aaron, if in 10 years there's 3 people, or if in 10 years there's 150 people, the Lord rejoices over that. And so go and preach and pray and sing and read and see the word and sacraments and see what the Lord does and bless his name for that. And so I know there are other brothers in other places that are doing that, and it doesn't happen as quickly. But at the same time, there is a freedom in kind of saying we came and we did what we knew we needed to do because we know that's what the scriptures teach us, and then prayed that the Lord would bless it. And he has seen fit to do so. And obviously we use some natural wisdom, like what Andrew was saying. They had a Bible study on Sunday nights. Early on, we started with the Canons of Dort. That was our first beginning Sunday night gatherings, Sunday morning, or actually they were Sunday night gatherings. And then after that, we started having about 30, 40 people showing up. And so we started morning worship services. And then we went to the confession in the evening. And we taught the confession for 2 years in the evenings, with the goal of moving it to an evening service. But the concept was pattern this. And then we wanted to be up front. This is who we are, right?
Yeah.
The whole time I told everybody, we're Reformed Presbyterians. And some of you are going to like this, and some of you are not going to like this. Some of you are going to think we're on the road to Rome because we baptize babies, and then some of you are going to think, we are way too conservative. Are way too liberal in some of the things we do because we're not enough like Rome, right? And it's or enough like the Pentecost. And so we kind of fit into a middle spot. And so I think from the get-go, what Andrew said about using the confession. We have gone through the shorter catechism, the larger catechism, and the confession during worship. And we just keep doing that. And then I just realized that once we finish the Gospel of John in our morning readings, we'll go to Revelation. And then we will have read the entirety of the New Testament as a church together. They've heard the Word of God read in the whole New Testament, and we're a good ways through the Old Testament. The Lord has been faithful in that. So that when you ask that question, I feel like how you do it fast or slow, I don't know. It's one of those, do what the Lord's called you to do, be faithful. And as Kevin DeYoung talks about in that plotting, that article about plotting, put your head down, do what you know you're supposed to do. And then maybe 20 years down the road, you look back and go, whoa, look what the Lord did. And so, yeah.
Well, and I think the conventional wisdom is start with mercy ministry, then maybe a Bible study. Then after you've got 50 or 150 coming to the Bible study, then maybe start talking about worship. Whereas what y'all did very quickly is we're just going to plant a church, and it's God who gives the growth. And so I think the takeaway, or at least what I've taken away from private conversations with y'all, and then this summary here is just do it, to quote Nike, right?
Yeah.
And expect God to do it. Expect God to be faithful to his word.
I think also tied in with that, Ryan, there's with that conventional wisdom about, it takes a long time. I think there's an underlying fear sometimes, especially in Latin America, that is Reformed believers. We're scared that people are going to mistake us for Catholics. And so, you don't want to introduce, the Presbyterian doctrines too soon. So, don't baptize children. People are going to think you're Catholic. Or don't use the word sacraments. Use ordinances. which I actually have a big issue with. I think you call it what it's called, which is a sacrament, and that's not a Catholic term. That's the right term. um, but what you've seen with Aaron or heard from Aaron, I think, is not whether or not it's fast or slow. Again, is dependent upon the Lord and His mercy and what He wants. But I think what you see there is this is who we are. We're unashamed of that because this is what we believe Scripture teaches. And so we're going to put that out and let people come if they will. And if that's not their cup of tea and they don't want to be there, then they'll go somewhere else. And, Lord bless them. And hopefully they find a place that is actually teaching Scripture. But yeah, I think part of that is just you want to be slow so that people have an opportunity to sort of assimilate this information and understand that you're not Catholic. We're not Catholic.
Yeah.
And, that's just the bottom line.
Well, I mean, you're not papists, but hopefully you are Catholic.
We're not Roman Catholic, excuse me.
But so there is this imperative that you transition folks from what they're expecting, or these preconceived notions and suspicions that they may have of evangelicals or confessional Protestants, but that you don't dumb down or you don't pander to their expectations. You hold out our theology in worship, the theology of the Bible.
Yeah, you teach and you say, look, when you think about Reformed missions throughout history, you see catechetical schools start and that kind of stuff. It's the idea of we're teaching, and so the idea is don't be ashamed of it, embrace it. I'm part of the PCA, and I'm a PCA minister because I'm convicted that way, and I am Presbyterian by conviction. So why would I not present that and then say, let these people who are coming to church who have the ability to read the Scriptures and be Bereans, let them be Bereans, instead of saying, "Ooh, I'm going to be the Berean for them and hide these things that I think that they'll be uncomfortable with." I'd rather say, "No, here it is," and then you search the Scriptures and agree or disagree. But that's the freedom in doing it. Is I don't need to hide my convictions, my Reformed convictions of the Scriptures. Rather present them clearly, and then allow people through the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives to grow an understanding of the Scriptures. And I think that frees you. Again, it frees you. It actually sets you free to say, I can say what I need to say. I don't need to be scared of the word catechisms. I don't have to be afraid of using the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. I don't need to be afraid of our confessions. I can just say, this is what we believe. And so we bought a bunch. I'm super thankful for Banner of Truth. Just put out a new confession in Spanish, and it's really well done. It's nice, and I have a bunch of copies. So when people come and they're a little uncomfortable, I hand them the confession. Read through it. Come back. Ask me any question you got. And every time we read the confession in church, we oftentimes say, "Hey, if this has caused any questions for you, I'll be at the back after the service. Come ask me any question you got." And we talk about it. And so I think instead of being scared of teaching it and almost ashamed of what we are, it's more like, no, this is what we are. Ask any question. And you're free to do that. And so I think that has helped as well, because people have struggled. And that's how you transition them. I think you have the conversations.
Yeah. And yet there is some cultural accommodation that has to happen, right? You're not, you're not speaking 17th century English, because that's when our confession and catechisms were written. So, but how do you distinguish between cultural accommodation and compromise? Or, you can only lead the sheep to green pastures and still waters so fast. So how do you discern that? Andrew, you said, it sounds like you made some big changes at the church where you were ministering. How did you take the temperature and discern when they were ready for that?
Well, with the help of the session, primarily, I think
the what?
The session, the consistory is the word we use in Spanish. But that was, those guys were, as we begin to talk as a session, as they begin to come across, especially some of the newer guys to this, they really fell in love with it. They liked it, and I remember being in session meetings and I'd bring something up, or the pastor would bring something up that we thought we needed to do in worship, and these guys would say, Absolutely. Why haven't we been doing this? And to a T, I'd say, well, we didn't know we were supposed to. And so I don't know necessarily about, because you get into the cultural accommodation stuff, you get into all sorts of philosophies of ministry that have been problematic over the years. I think when we're looking at Presbyterianism specifically, there's going to be some differences from one country to another, from one culture to another. Aaron was talking about, you guys were kind of going back and forth jokingly about changing the BCO to fit the Honduran context. And that's true. One of those specifically, and Aaron may disagree with me, but I spent 10 years in higher education and in Costa Rica. Latin America does not offer an MDiv. The church doesn't require it. So, you can go to the States and get one. You can go to Europe and get one. But until there's a drive, a push from the church that, hey, you have to have this, it's not really going to probably be there. I mean, I suppose I could be wrong about that, but that means that what we find among pastors beyond not having an MDiv is that many of them are not very well educated at all, biblically speaking. And so an accommodation there might be hey, we have a high value as Presbyterians on a good biblical education. So maybe it's not initially an MDiv. Maybe it's going to be, an undergraduate degree because the guy doesn't have anything. Maybe it is the MDiv. I don't know, but that might be a place where from country to country, there would be questions about, what would be included in their version of the BCO regarding educational requirements. I would push for higher ones. My fear would be if you put lower ones in, they'll never be raised. If you put higher ones in, people might surprise you.
Yeah, yeah. But have you seen that as you try to discern what does it look like in this particular culture to apply the theology of the Bible? How have you seen God's blessing in that?
Yeah, I think for us, it's, my staff is at the church is half and half, right? So we've got half missionaries, Americans, and then half Hondurans or catrachos, if you want to call them that. And I think there's just a lot of things where we've kind of said, look, this is what the scriptures principally teach about worship, and this is what we're going to do. How that works out in every church, we want to have, an idea of what the Bible regulates for us in worship, but then how that all, when I just struggle with accommodation in one sense, in the sense of there's a constant conversation between us and in how we even understand, hey, culturally, if I say this, how does that hit? But it's not me changing the principle of what the scriptures teach. It's how the application of what I'm saying works, right? So I'm not going to change the Bible. I'm gonna change maybe the way that I'm talking about it. But cultural accommodation, I'm always hesitant to do that. I know that Paul makes arguments of being Jew and being Greek and all that kind of stuff, but it also feels like when it comes to theological things and things about God, he doesn't really move on those, right? He is kind of like, this is what it is. And so
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about cultural accommodation, I think it's the outworking of how, for example, how the seminary is going to work here, how ordination process is going to work here, our educational expectations, how the church planting process is going to work, how we're going to relate in denominational thoughts of future churches and all that kind of stuff. And some of that the church has to mature into. I can't just say, hey, you've got it already. I don't know if that makes sense, but when I think about cultural accommodations, I'm thinking oftentimes just, I don't know that I want to be careful how I say this. I don't know we've made a ton because I want to be careful about what we're doing in how we do it, because I don't know that it is set by the culture how we should worship or how we should do certain things. I think it's set by God, and then the outworking of that we can play out. But I would say, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but like even one of the things that we've done is we have our worship in the back at our church, our musicians in the back. And at some level, we've done that intentionally because we are in a culture of show. And so musicians want to be in front. They want to be seen. And for us, it's more like, look, they are accompanying our worship. They are help. And so some people might say that's a non-cultural accommodation. It's more like, no, we want to think about our worship and what we're doing instead of thinking about it for man-centeredness. It's God-centered. And so I don't know. I didn't answer your question because I don't know how much cultural accommodation I've done, and I might get a little flack for that, but it's just kind of where I am.
Yeah, well, let's kind of, you mentioned worship. Let's sort of transition. What does worship look like in various contexts? Obviously, you're not worshiping in English or something approximating English, American. You're worshiping in Honduran, I guess. Is that the language? Was that what y'all speak down there? And Costa Rican. But how is it going to be different from what people might expect, if they go to a PCA General Assembly and, this is how the PCA worships in, America, or their local church. How is it different, or is it?
Go for it, Andrew.
No, it is. And it is even between countries in Latin America. So I think the first thing is the language. Another is going to be where you worship. As far as, we have in many PCA churches across the U.S., obviously, I would argue even lavish accommodations for our worship. Not everybody, obviously, but there are some really nice sanctuaries, and they have a lot of, we work hard to sort of accommodate our people, and air conditioning and good sound. And I remember during my time in Peru, the 2 years I was there, I worshiped at a small church about 45 minutes from my house that was comprised of people who lived in what had previously in the 80s been known as a red zone. This was a place where people came out of the mountains looking for better work, but where the Shining Path was active in the 80s when that was there, and had of course been eliminated by the time I was there. But they were Quechua people, so they spoke a mix of Spanish and Quechua. And one of the things they did, they had an had a Spanish worship service and then a Quechua service. But our accompaniment, many Lord's Days, was with an accordion, and the ladies sang what's called a style called wino, which was actually initially very grating on my ears, and it was very hard to worship. And we sat on these really uncomfortable benches, and with the door open, and the dogs came in and out of the back door, and you could hear the motorcycles and the buses. They would change the oil for the buses right next to our church because that's what was there. And so the experience of worship was drastically different from anything that you're used to in the US. And that's just one example, and it's a little bit extreme, but you walk into our church in Costa Rica met in our auditorium at the seminary, and the elevator, it was on the second floor, and the elevator didn't work to get up there. So we were carrying all of our instruments up and down, and there's just some differences in that regard about, I think, what we've come to expect around worship. Not things that are necessarily right or wrong, but that are very different for a different reality for people who have had that experience.
I also would say our Latin American brothers and sisters are willing to put up with a lot more as far as what Andrew just described, right? Noises, things going on, kids getting up, kids screaming, people, just a lot happening, and they're focused. And the amount of times that I've preached 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and people are like, where's the rest of the sermon, right? They're waiting for an hour-long sermon. I think it goes back to seminary days and thinking about, Derek Thomas again saying, some of you guys are not hour-long preachers. Some of you are 30-minute preachers. And so in the back of my head, I'm like, they're asking for more, but I don't think I'm an hour-long preacher. But the willingness to it makes you go back to kind of thinking about Acts and kind of people gathering in homes and sitting all night listening to Paul, and, people falling out of windows because they fell asleep during the sermon. But the context for us, we live in a city. So it's very different. If I were where we studied Spanish in a smaller town, it's a very different feel. And so here in the city, some level, Ryan, if you were to come down and visit, you would kind of be like, everything that I feel like happens in Fort Oglethorpe just happened. It just was all in Spanish. Now, there might be some other dynamics happening that you're not used to, but like what Andrew said, just other distractions. But I feel like in various contexts, I'm always amazed that I get bothered that it's hot. And I'm like, man, it was so hot. And people are like, oh, I didn't notice. And you're like, we've been in here for an hour and 15 minutes and I'm sweating. And y'all are just like, we go longer.
Don't you have an air conditioner? Don't you have an air conditioner pointed right at you in the pulpit?
We've added one just to like hit right in my face because I'm so hot. But it still is like, people are, if we didn't have any air conditioning, they'd say it's hot, but they're fine. And like this last Sunday, I was just so encouraged by our church in the sense that like we had the Lord's Supper. It was a longer Sunday, and the service was about an hour and a half. We started at 10:30. We finished at noon, and we always have coffee and semitas, which is like a bread that we eat after the service. And I was expecting people to head out quick. I mean, at 1 o'clock, people were still standing out front, just chatting and talking and fellowshipping, and it was kind of like, man, I love this about this culture, and just the ability to be together and kind of spend lots of time together. And so that's a cultural context that I've actually loved about here. Where in the States, I feel like sometimes if I need to catch somebody after the service, I better be running after them sometimes to get to them before the car. So,
yeah. And I wonder how much of it is in Latin America, where, Reformed, confessional, even Protestant, biblical Christianity isn't taken for granted, that people really appreciate it, that they, for many of them, I presume, they're the first generation to know this, and to not be working their way out of purgatory.
Yeah, I think we talk about that a lot as well. It's like I was just mentioning it to somebody this weekend. I was like, I can think of all the men who are nominated. Very few of them have one generation to the next telling the next generation about this is your dad's God, and this is the God of the Bible, and then it being passed on. And so seeing families doing that is such a rich thing, that they're getting time. And the amount of men who've told me, Aaron, I don't have a dad that taught me this, or a mom, or anything, or a grandparent. And then I look back and say, well, my granddad served in PCA churches. My dad served in PCA churches. My other brother's in a PCA church. And it's like, whoa, that is a huge blessing, heritage. And I think we're trying to see that in Latin America, and hopefully same thing in Costa Rica.
Yeah. That you've gone to the ones who are far off, that God has drawn to himself. So how do you deal with the prevalence of Romanism, with its syncretistic pagan ideology that is just adapted to Latin American? How do you confront that? Are people, how do you deal with, many of them, I presume, had some water and chrism sprinkled on them by a Romish priest, but is that, Christian baptism? Are they willing to accept that? How do you deal with those issues?
We've gone, it's been one of the harder things. Not in my conviction is, and I'll just say it outright. We don't accept Roman baptism at our.
Whoa. That's just water, right? It's just
yeah. And I respect our fathers in the faith, like Doug Kelly and guys like that, and I understand the holding. But my conviction over time, in our context, is that we need to be very clear. And so we have just said we don't accept Roman baptism, but that's based on what is a true church. And so what that has created is almost another side of the coin. Like, we got a lot of people coming from prosperity gospel churches and from churches, little tiny churches in neighborhoods. And so knowing if those are true churches, right, and researching all that, and people are like, well, I don't know if that was a true church. That has created another level for me, if that makes sense. It's not just the Rome side; it's also the evangelical, broad evangelical side of what we would accept.
Yeah. Was it even Trinitarian in some of those communions, I'm sure?
Exactly. And so that's been part of the struggle as well. We have just tried to walk through each situation with wisdom, and each one differently, kind of walking through what churches you come from. Can we talk to their pastor? Can we get on their website? Can we find out information about them? Because we don't want to just, we also believe there's one baptism. And so we don't want, we've pressed hard. We are not rebaptizing you.
Yes.
We are
Thank
baptizing you. And so I think that's where we're trying to be careful from both sides. And I don't, and I think that's created sometimes pastoral headaches because of that conviction, but it's been something that we've tried to walk through. I don't know about Andrew, what y'all were doing.
Yeah. So I don't have a particularly strong conviction about not accepting Roman Catholic baptism, just on the basis that it is Trinitarian in nature, and our confession says that there's nothing in the man who administers it. So that makes it effective or ineffective. I understand Aaron's position, and actually would agree with kind of that case by case thing. Now, our session had a different view, and I think that needs to be taken into account. So part of the reason I don't have this, strong conviction against it is because I didn't come out of the Roman Catholic Church. I don't know what it is to break ties, and what that baptism into a Presbyterian Protestant evangelical denomination means for people who are making a statement about their relationship to the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, you have to understand that people are Roman Catholic by birth. If your parents are, you are, and they're christened into that, if you will. And so I think we often would just talk to the individual, say, if they wanted to be baptized into, I would not withhold that from them at all. I think they're trying to make a break. So my conviction lies in the area sort of allowing them to make that decision, not necessarily forcing a baptism upon them if they didn't feel like they needed to make that break. So I don't know if that opens me up for charges of some kind, but
your clerk will probably have to send you a letter or something. But that is an interesting point that both of you make, that it seems like those who come out of Romanism, especially as it is in Latin America, where it's so syncretized with the ancient paganism of the Aztecs or the Incas, that as they come to Christ, they realize they need to be baptized, because the organization of which they used to be a part was not a church for many of them. Now, and I appreciate the nuance that Andrew, that you answered that, and the sensitivity, Aaron, that y'all are engaged in, that it's not just we're going to be Protestant, and as long as you're a Protestant, it's okay. It's no, was it a true church? Was it a church where the triune God was worshipped, that Christ was proclaimed, that the gospel was preached? Is it a true church? That makes it hard.
And it makes it real hard, because in our context, one of the things that I was struggling with, somebody told me they had been baptized in this church. Might know enough about it, but I wasn't super comfortable with it. But then as time went on, they started kind of saying, we were at a youth event and they pressed us, and there might have been a young lady who's one of the youth directors that baptized. And I was like, please stop talking. Please stop talking. Please stop. I'm getting more and more uncomfortable. And I think one of the things is that's what kind of alarmed me, right? That was like, oh, wait, we got to ask a lot more questions. We need to have an understanding of what's going on in these other churches. And are they true churches? And that's where, again, not trying to, good godly men fall, and even our positional papers in the 80s kind of leave us in a place that we can read this slightly different, and I'm okay with that. But contextually, it's a big question here in Honduras. And so it's something that I've spent a lot of time wrestling through. And I think for me, seeing guys like Will Thompson in Yazoo City kind of go from one place to another place, and him pressing home to me, Aaron, It's the idea of the church. Is the church a true church? If it's not a true church, can it give baptisms?
Mm.
And for me, that's a big point. And even when I'm fencing the table, I'm glad our people listen. I have a lot of people who don't, oftentimes in their first or second visit, won't take the Lord's Supper when I say, that you're a member in good standing of a Christ preaching church that is evangelical and you've been baptized. I mean, the amount of times that I've had conversations after the service over that very thing. Aaron, you said a member. I don't think our church had membership. Okay, well, that's good to know. And then you said that is Christ. They were preaching the prosperity gospel. I don't think I was a member of a true church. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk more about that. And then they're like, I haven't been baptized. I was like, but you said you're a Christian. Why haven't you been baptized? Well, my church didn't. And it's like, okay, well, there's a whole. Does that make sense? And so, me, even fencing the table has allowed there to be more conversations for teaching, and I think that's good.
Yeah, we had some Covenant students show up. School just started, and hey, what about the Lord's table? And they're from out west somewhere, and it's like, well, we're not really members of a church. Okay, well, hey, we can help you with that, but in order to come to the Lord's table, you've got to be a baptized believer of a Protestant church, member in good standing. And, I think I used to say evangelical church, but that doesn't really mean anything anymore. Since the 2010s, it just, what does evangelical mean? The guy who wears a red hat, I think. So I've just said Protestant church, but that's kind of, well, the Methodists are Protestant, the Episcopalians are Protestant, so it's becoming more of a mouthful, and that discernment. You really just have to know the elders. Need to know know the congregation, and so I've heard of persecution by Romanists in Mexico of Protestants. Have y'all endured any either governmental or Roman Catholic persecution, violence toward believers there?
No. I mean, that's one of the things that many Sunday nights in our prayer of Thanksgiving, we thank the Lord for the freedom to gather, to worship, that we do it without persecution. We have disagreements and that kind of stuff, but we haven't, at this point, we're nowhere near Nicaragua or Venezuela in kind of where their leaders are going and what they see. We have a lot more kind of religious freedom here. And in Honduras, the Catholic Church is probably one of the nations that it is weaker. I would say it's even stronger in Costa Rica than it is here. I saw things in Costa Rica when I visited that I was like, whoa, they are not doing this in Honduras. So we have a more move away from the Catholic Church, but at the same time, just a different form of works-based righteousness, just in a different gospel, another gospel. So that's what I would say. Andrew, I don't know what you would say.
Oh, yeah. So there was not in Costa Rica. There is a strong connection, again, family ties to the Roman Catholic Church, but there's no persecution. It's relatively passive, and they're actually facing issues. It's interesting, cultural issues where they're losing members to Protestant and then evangelical churches, who then lose them to nothing. And so there's this cyclical sort of pattern of they leave the Catholic Church, come into some sort of a Protestant expression of the church, don't find what they're looking for, probably because the gospel's not being preached, and then they end up, basically unchurched on the backside of things. And so I didn't experience any persecution. The closest thing maybe was we let our residency lapse at one point and had to redo that. And in the meantime, there was a change in government. And so they got a new person who's in charge of immigration, and they changed some of the rules around religious visas, which is what we had, which made it a little more difficult to get ours. But I mean, that's hardly tantamount to persecution. It was just a few more months of paperwork. If we hadn't let it lapse, we wouldn't have been in that position either.
Sounds like a you problem rather than
Yeah,
a hope problem.
so-
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I think that there are places that that people can go, and the opposition will take different forms, and it's not always violent opposition. I'm thankful for people willing to go to those places, but Andrews, you talk about people coming, from Romanism to some sort of bland, not Romanism, but also not confessionally Protestant, where the gospel's not there, a spiritual community where, the only thing you get with the baptism is a t-shirt. Um, how does MTW make a priority of planting Reformed confessional Presbyterian churches? Aaron, you said you were part of MTW, because there's a difference between just a church where you get the t-shirt and you're in versus a confessionally Protestant Presbyterian church.
I think part of the way that MTW can do that is by putting an emphasis on, well, we voted on this a few years ago, I guess, when with the whole thing about teaching elders and team leaders and that kind of stuff with Mission to the World. I think that's a step in the right direction. I really think part of it is just understanding that the primary role of the missions sending agency of the PCA is to plant Reformed and confessional churches. So as you recruit TEs to go do that, make sure that they want to plant Reformed and confessional churches and not just some expression of a church that, and so I think that's part of it. I think I look at Aaron and I say, I'd love to see, 100 more missionaries around the world who share his conviction I mean, he's my younger brother, but I look up to him quite a bit, for just sort of the boldness that he's got and the way that he's been unashamed about who he is as a Reformed confessional Presbyterian in a country that doesn't know much about that. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah, well said. Aaron, how do you interact with MTW? And I've got your page up here. Looks like that picture's a little bit out of date, though.
It's a little out of date. So yeah, you're gonna pull that page up.
I'm going to pull that page up right now. Yeah.
My kids are a lot older now.
Oh my
whoa,
goodness.
that is
out of date, isn't it? That's about like 9 years out of date, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna get an email from MTW. Now you're getting made fun of on a podcast for not giving us new pictures.
Well, but if people want to support you, it's 13406. If folks are able to come alongside and support the Hunder and Halberts.
The Hunder and Halberts, but there's another Hunder and Halbert here too. So my brother's here, the other brother.
Well, he needs to pay for better search engine optimization, because when I searched MTW Honduras Halberts, that was the first result. So,
well, when our girls were born, I wrote an article, and that created a firestorm, and there were a lot of pictures taken off of my Facebook, things taken off of MTW, that kind of stuff. And so I've done very little like updating things, because articles still float around about kind of how our family grew. So that's part of the reason a lot of those things aren't updated. It's kind of like, I go to churches and I visit them, and they don't need a new picture of me. Yeah. But yeah, so my kids are now a lot older. But as far as for what you asked, I think the idea for me is we have to show young folks that there is an ability to come and do just normal means of grace ministry. I have told people a lot of times, I feel like if I were living in Winona, Mississippi, or in outside of Atlanta, or in the upper Northeast, or out in California, I'd be doing the exact same thing I'm doing here. Like and so to me, it's just the idea of showing that what we need is people to go and do the ordinary means of grace and do church planting. And that, again, that idea that our ecclesiology will drive our missiology into how we do mercy ministry, into how we engage with the people around us. We live in the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And so the idea is that we need a church. The greatest need, and this is something that one of our elder candidates says all the time, is the greatest need of anybody that we serve in these ministries that we partner with is Jesus. and we need them to have a place where they can gather to worship. And whether they're coming from extremely poor or extremely rich, the need is the exact same. Yes, we can alleviate other things in the process, but the goal is that they would know Jesus and walk towards heaven with their eyes set on an eternal inheritance, not one here. And so, I think the more that we can think about the church being the fountainhead of what we do, right? Like we plant churches, and our ecclesiology of what the church should then go and do in evangelism and outreach and in mercy ministry and gathering the saints together to worship week by week. That set the pattern for what we're doing. I think that would help. I think that's what we should be doing. I think there are places around the world that are doing that, and MTW's trying to look towards that. I think in some places, and continuing to look towards that. And so, I think that's been the freedom for me. Is that's what I've received, is the ability to come and do this, and it's been good. So I think the more that we could be on seminary campuses presenting this kind of, hey, let's go do this and go after it, and not sell it as, oh, go sacrifice for Jesus, but go live the reality of the richness of the body of Christ around the world and do the work in another place and call it home and do it for a while. Not, hey, I'm going to go give it a year. No. Paul's called to give it. We gave you our lives. Like, go give your lives to something and do it. And just do 50 years and see what happens. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to leave after 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. I just think, more willingness to say, hey, let's put our hand to the plow, see what the Lord does, put in firm foundations, and then just rejoice that the Lord promises that his word will not return void. He will build the church, and that he is the power, and his word is the power unto salvation. And if those three things are true, take that and put it in your quiver and let those arrows fly and see what the Lord does. And I think that frees missionaries to go do that. And even anybody that is out doing mission work, that's your focus. So that's what I would say here in Honduras and around the world. I think that's more people going and doing that I would love to see that. And there are guys that I've seen doing that, and I'm so encouraged by it. So.
Well, Andrew Halbert, thank you very much for your time and the encouragement of what the Lord's doing in Latin America.
Thanks for having us. Or thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
Me too.